سيداتي وسادتي، ستبدأ الآن الجلسة السابعة تحت عنوان هندسة إقليمية جديدة.
Ladies and gentlemen, panel 7 entitled A New Regional Geometry will start now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Karim Haggag. I am the director of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI for short. I want to, at the outset, extend my word of thanks to Dr. Ibtisam for the opportunity to participate in this year's ADSD. Thank you, as always, Dr. Ibtisam. And to thank EPC for organizing what I think is a very timely panel to kick off our discussion on day 2 of the Abu Dhabi Strategic Dialogue. So the title of this panel is A New Regional Geometry. I think this is a very apt title. It prompts us to think in terms of new configurations of power, new positioning, new dynamics, and to address what is a very complicated regional geography, we've assembled what I think is a very stellar panel to help us describe what this new geometry looks like. With us this morning, we have Dr. Paul Salim, the former president and currently senior fellow at the Middle East Institute based in Washington. Ambassador Nasser Kamel, senior Egyptian diplomat and currently the Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. Dr. Mohammed Baharoun, the Director General of the Dubai Public Research Center, or Bahous. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Kilic Kanat, Research Director of the SETA Institute based in Washington. Thank you all for being with us this morning. Paul, if I can start with you, please, to help us set the scene for what this new geometry looks like. So, to describe this new geometry, one thinks of two narratives that are emerging. So, the first narrative is very much a triumphal narrative. The axis of resistance has been defeated, or at least severely weakened. And therefore, the threats to regional security and regional peace seem to have receded. The threat of Iran's nuclear program, the threat posed by Hezbollah, by Hamas, so non-state groups in general, these threats seem to have receded. And because of that, there is the sense that new space has opened up and new opportunities have opened up. Space to deepen regional integration, space to perhaps broaden the scope of the Abraham Accords by including new players, space to think of a new potential for reinforcing state sovereignty in Lebanon vis-a-vis Hezbollah, and new possibilities for Syria given the change of regime. So this is very much a triumphal narrative. One hears this narrative mainly coming from Israel and to a certain extent from the United States. There is a counter-narrative that says that many of these conflicts are now anchored in very fragile ceasefires. This is the reality we see almost on a daily basis in Lebanon, for example. And to the extent that these ceasefires are enforced, they are enforced by Israeli military power. And that, of course, opens up the possibility of renewed conflicts, let alone the perception that this new configuration seems to lack legitimacy. So which of these narratives best captures the new regional geometry? Or do we have to think of a new narrative? Walk us through this. And I know you will never fail, as always, to capture all of this in under 5 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you, Karim. And it's good to see so many people early in this second session. That's great. I mean, geometry captures part of it, but I think it also does not capture a lot of what we're trying to get at in terms of what kind of regional order or regional structure we're getting at. One is that the geometry, if you want to call it that, is still in flux. We are in the middle of something. We are not at the end point of something. Yes, it has been 2 years, but none of the wars seem to be decisively over, particularly what might be coming between Israel and Iran. So there's still a lot of fluidity, even to the balances or the power structures. What certainly has happened is a disruption of the old pre-October 7 tentative stability with a small s, which was based on a precarious balance of power between Israel on the one hand, effectively, and Iran and a bunch of allied militias and groups on the other. And that lasted for several years. Within that context, the Abraham Accords proceeded. Israel felt that both on its southern and northern fronts, it thought it had an understanding with Hamas and Hezbollah. Interestingly, that tentative order, if you want to call it that with a small o, was broken by the axis of resistance, by Hamas and then Hezbollah, and changed Israeli strategy from one of kind of having coexistence with different groups to a very proactive strategy. Where we are now is a very unstable situation. One is that it is still fluid and there's still battles to come, so we don't know where we're going to end up. Secondly, when you look at the region, its stability is either because there is a balance of power or because there is a negotiated, inclusive set of agreements, what you might call a legitimate order. We have none of those. Currently, we have a great imbalance of power, obviously favoring Israel, and Iran is on the back foot. And you already described the triumphalism that that has brought about, but it has also brought about new fears and new potential instabilities signified by the attack on Qatar and what Israel might still do. So we do not have a balance in the region, and that might be continuously destabilizing. Secondly, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has ended up being the prime mover in this dynamic, I mean, interestingly, it was Sinwar who created this new dynamic, but it's Prime Minister Netanyahu who has taken advantage of it. He's been very effective, successful, I don't know what you want to call it, in waging various wars, but he has not been able to translate military victories into sustainable political wins in any arena to a large degree. In the Israeli-Palestinian sphere, certainly he's devastated Gaza, he's weakened Hamas tremendously, there's action on the West Bank, but there's still no political strategy for Israel to coexist with 7 million Arabs in this small territory. So that there's no victory there politically. There's been great changes in Syria and Lebanon, but there too, the tool of war is still the only one that's being pursued. There's some talks between Israel and Syria, none between Lebanon and Israel at this point. Hasn't been able to translate those into sustainable wins. The biggest win in the region potentially would be normalization with Saudi Arabia and everything that would bring about. No progress towards that really from the Israeli side. And vis-a-vis Iran, yes, it's been hit, it might be hit again, but that has not been translated into a sustainable situation. So I think we're still in a region at war, and a region where, yes, the geometry or the power imbalances have been scrambled, but we don't know where we're going to end up. I will end with one statement, looking at the positive, or those players that are trying to suggest order rather than disorder. Certainly the Gulf countries who want de-escalation, who want negotiated conclusions to certainly the war in Gaza, two-state solution, resolution to the Palestinian issue, negotiations with Iran, and rules of and support for Syria and Lebanon, and stabilize the region. I think Turkey, to a large degree, is in that camp as well, and significantly, I think President Trump is in that camp. But two of the bigger players, Netanyahu's Israel, at least for now, And Iran, so far, are not very much in that camp. So we will see where it goes. Thank you.
So I took away two key words from your assessment, Paul. The state of flux, that is still very much a feature of the current geometry, so it's very much still unsettled. And the prospects for a stable order, with a small o, as you put it, that might emerge. And I think that poses very interesting questions about what that order would look like, what would be the basis for that order. So I think I will come back to you with these questions. So if you could hold those thoughts, because I think you set the scene for us very well. Let me turn to Nasser, if I may. So Egypt has played a very critical role in what is a very central piece of this emerging puzzle, which is Gaza. Egypt has played a role together with Turkey, together with Qatar, and of course the Trump administration in reaching a ceasefire, in promoting the 20-point plan proposed by the administration. And therefore, Egypt has a stake in one critical piece that should be the foundation of this new order. If you can describe to us how the Gaza piece of this puzzle fits into the broader picture that Paul described for us, and what would be Egypt's outlook with respect to this new emerging geometry or the new emerging order that Paul set the scene for us?
Thank you. Thank you, Karim, for your question. And I join everybody here in thanking Dr. Ibtissam Al-Kaabi for having organized this wonderful forum, and the EDS for excellent organization of this event. Let me first join what has been said. Yes, the region is going through a flux. We are in the middle of something. I'm just quoting you. And disruption is the name of the game. But within that context, we could see that some of the regional actors, including Egypt, of course, are trying to capitalize on the moment in terms of challenges and opportunities by pursuing a policy of de-escalation, as you rightly mentioned so, and also a policy that has, in terms of purpose, containing Israel to a certain extent, that has emerged as the regional hegemon and a driver of instability. Although it has scored points, but it has become a driver of instability, not only in the Levant, but also in the Gulf, with the attack on Qatar, which was, in my view, a game changer in terms of how it is perceived by the GCC countries. And this has, in a way, led to main actors, not only in the Arab world, but including Turkey and others, to try to forge out of this 20-point plan and others a more balanced regional order that could safeguard the state of the region's sovereignty at large and use the growing US role in the implementation, oversight, and management, and the BB setting, as we call it, to contain Israel's growing tendency for excess. Within that regional setting, Egypt has embraced it to start with, and has embraced this vision of the region, and has emerged during the crisis and is having what is being called by journalists in the Washington Post a diplomatic moment. For simple reason, one, it has succeeded in vehemently opposing the so-called Riviera Plan, which in a sense was a displacement strategy of the Palestinian people out of Gaza. It has came up with its own plan that was endorsed later on by the Arab and the Islamic world and the international community at large, especially in Europe. And this has been strengthened by the Saudi-French initiative that was endorsed overwhelmingly by the whole international community. And that, in a sense, was taken on board, albeit not entirely, by the 20-point plan of President Trump. When we look at the idea of a technocratic Palestinian management of Gaza, this was actually proposed by the Egyptian and later on by others. The training of a Palestinian police force, all of that are points that were originally put forward by Egypt and everybody else later, including also the idea of Egypt and Jordan training a capable police force that could do some of the heavy lifting when it comes to stabilizing the security situation in Gaza. Moreover, Egypt's geographical positioning, being its geographic proximity to both Israel and Gaza, is giving it definitely a certain leverage, and also its open channels to all the spectrum of actors, be it Israel, be it all the component of the Palestinian national movement, Fatah, Hamas, all the other faction, and of course the PA at the center of it, but also its extensive, I would say, intelligence presence within Gaza and knowledge of the reality on the ground in Gaza. I would dare say that 3 countries have this knowledge. One is Israel, the second one is the PA, and the third one is Egypt. And that has helped. We could look at the recent visit of the Egyptian chief of intelligence to Israel, which has been, as far as the press has reported, pushing Netanyahu not to resume military operation in the Gaza Strip. Also, the meeting of the different Palestinian faction in Cairo trying to agree on a list of potential candidates to be in this administration, new administration body for Gaza. All of that has given Egypt a moment where it can contribute if, because we are still, as I go back to what you said, in a moment of uncertainty. We don't know if the 20-point plan will work, but if it does, and if there is a buy-in by the international community, I'm not sure the resolution in the Security Council will see the day. When we look at the different editing exercise done by so many members of the Security Council, there is a question mark here. But if this effort leads to a Security Council resolution or to the creation of the ISF in Gaza, Egypt will be also the main gate for this force, and the main gate also for the reconstruction of Gaza. All of that within a geometry that is not yet defined, and here I join again the previous intervention, could give Egypt leverage to play the role of a moderator that is, to a certain extent, looking to build a regional security architecture that is based on national security, on also containing excess coming either from extremist movement like Hamas or by Israel extremist, actual extremist government.
So the uncertainties surrounding Gaza, I think, reinforce what Paul
Exactly.
set the scene for us in terms of the state of flux that still characterizes much of the regional geometry. So I think a lot to come back to. I know we have a panel later in the day on Gaza, but that certainly raises questions about how the Gaza piece of the puzzle fits into this broader regional geometry. Let me move to Mohammed to give us a perspective from the Gulf on this new regional geometry. Because in a sense, the Gulf has been attempting to adjust to different regional geometries very much since the Arab Spring. So the onset of the revolutions in Egypt, in Syria, especially the onset of civil wars in Syria, in Yemen, to a certain extent in Libya, the uncertainty surrounding Iraq, the uncertainty surrounding the future US role in the region. So there's been a very long track record of the Gulf attempting to adjust to this new regional geometry. What is different this time, this new iteration of the region's geometry that we are seeing emerging? And is it fair to say that many of the assumptions on which the Gulf have based their regional policy are now being called into question? I mean, the assumption that the Gulf can somehow insulate itself from regional chaos, regional instability, I think that was proved questionable given the attacks that we've seen on Doha by Israel, and preceding that on El Udeid base by Iran. The assumption that the Abraham Accords would move the region towards peace and stability, that is certainly, the potential is still there, but certainly also called into question. If you could tell us, what are the guiding assumptions now on which the Gulf bases its policy in dealing with this new regional geometry?
Thank you, Ambassador Haddad. First of all, 3 points. Point of thank you, Dr. Tissam, not only for having us, but for maintaining the course of making this a really strategic debate for 12 years now, so thank you for that. Point of concurrence, I would concur with the previous speakers that yes, there is a state of change that is happening. You've described it, Dr. Paul, as flux, but possibly it's still an ongoing change. I concur that it is geometrical in proportion, because we've seen geometry is usually about space, size, position. So we've seen countries playing bigger role. Yesterday we've talked about the UAE and AI leadership. This is something much bigger than the size of the UAE, but that is how size is changing. But also, as pointed out, Israel has played a different role, a bigger role. We've seen it attacking 7 different countries in the course of 2 years. That was not the type of role Israel has seen itself before. So when it comes to geometry, yes, that is changing. Now, point of departure. I think you've asked what is the change. I think the change is not in geometry. It's not about size, it's not about position, it's not about, space, alliances. The change is in physics, it's not in geometry. Because physics is about motion, about energy, about forces. And that is what is changing in the region. There's a change of energy in the region. And I don't think it is staying at the region. One of the major shifts in energy is that there is a shift from energy towards geopolitics to geoeconomics. These are the new realities that realigning the way we're looking at the world. We've seen this happening with this concept of connectivity. How is it connecting the region to the world, but also turning the region into switchboard of the world economy, if you want. So that is a different type of change. We've seen, I'm sure Professor Chelik is going to mention this, but we've seen, for instance, how the development road started to change the way Turkey is looking at the Kurdish issue. And we've seen how that de-escalation started. Abrahamic Accords also did not bring just a political peace, it brought things like IMEC, which is, even though has not fully been achieved, but it's a different way of connecting the global south to the global north. These are new energies, it's not just geometry that is changing. Now, is it just staying in the region? I think we have seen examples that it did not. One, Sharm el-Sheikh summit was a very important position where we have seen the region collectively play a corrective role in the trajectory. The region took a stand. It was not one country. It was not one hegemonic power. A different role for the region. But also when it comes to the US, described the attack, the U.S. attack on Iran, as a show of hegemony or hegemonic power. Actually, it was a diplomatic attack. It stopped the war. It was a different type of attack. We also have seen President Trump in the Knesset talking about a possible peace between Israel and Iran. This is something that has not been, imagined before. This is a manifestation of a new type of energy that does not look, the US does not look at itself as a hegemonic power anymore. But this is not happening because the US just woke up. It's happening because other energies, movement, flows are happening in the region. So your questions on the Abrahamic Accord and how does this now, this change of physics, if you want, apply to the region? I think, one, the Abrahamic Accord is not about normalization. We keep talking about it as normalization. We will always fail to understand it. It's about a regional, physics that is different than before. It is not about whether we like or dislike Israel, whether Israel is an enemy or not. It is about how the health of the world economy can be maintained, and why do we need a quelling of all of these conflicts? Because we need that movement, that flow to continue. It's also about clashes of identity. We were trying to end those clashes of identity, which has plagued the region, but also plagued the world as well. So again, it's a different type of physics and manifestation. Last point is on your question on the attack on Doha. And yes, it definitely has set the region into a strategic revision, which is again part of the new physics, that flow is not static. It moves, and people would have to reconsider where they are. And I think the old idea of one security umbrella, one security provider, is possibly going to change into a stakeholders approach to security. Who are the stakeholders in the region's stability and security? When it comes to energy security, when it comes to flow of trade, when it comes to flow of money, flow of people, those countries will have to have a stake in it. So it is not going to be a family-owned company. It will possibly be a shareholder approach, a stakeholder approach into the region. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mohammed. A very interesting frame, or new frame that you introduced into this conversation. So physics versus geometry, energy versus positioning. I think that also opens up very interesting questions as to how that new frame can anchor a new security order or a new security architecture. So let me come back to you with a question on that. But let me turn to Kilic. So Kilic, Turkey has emerged as a country that clearly, to Ankara's role, is seen to be ascendant in the region. About a decade ago, Turkey was seen to be somewhat isolated from its regional environment. That clearly has changed. So now we're talking about a country that has agency in the region. And I think one clear example of that is how Turkey's role enabled, I think that's the right term to use, enabled the change that we've seen in Syria. Syria, of course, is a very big part of this new regional geometry. Explain to us Ankara's perspective. What should that new regional geometry look like? And what can Ankara do to stabilize that new regional geometry that, as has been said by the previous speakers, is still very much in flux?
Thank you very much. And at the beginning, I want to thank Dr. Ibtisam for organizing this. I'm part of organizing committee of 2 different forums. I know that it necessitates a lot of patience, a lot of work, and a lot of frustration sometimes with organizing such a major event. And of course, thank you for organizing this panel. So here is the thing. From the previous panelist, I agree with you that Turkey is a newcomer to the region, but a quick learner. Right? 2 decades ago, Turkey's foreign policy has nothing to do with Middle East. And avoiding Middle East and avoiding the conflicts in the Middle East was one of the pillars of the Turkish foreign policy. And with the US invasion of Iraq and the new government in 2003, a new era started. And Turkey had its disappointments, frustrations, and different feelings, victories, and problems. But at the end of the day, now it is much more self-confident than it used to be in the Middle East. And I agree with both two speakers who argue that there's uncertainty, and this uncertainty is the biggest problem. And we have to connect this uncertainty in the region with the uncertainty in international system. I don't know, it has been now probably 1 decade that we have been talking about the transformation of international relations and global system. It's not transforming. We definitely know that it will not be what it used to be, but we don't know where it is going. So the uncertainty of the superpower behavior is a major problem as well. And I agree with my friend that the geoeconomics will be part of that. From Ankara's perspective, there are several priorities. So number one, after 2 decades of different lessons, different arguments, I think there are now 4 different points. Number one is geography. And Turkey, when it looked to the geography in the region, see that in the north of Turkey, there's a war between Ukraine and Russia. In the east, there was recently, until recently, there was a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Another neighbor, Iran, has problems with its neighbors and with the global system. Iraq, there was a civil war. Syria, there was a civil war. So 4 of these countries' neighbors were top 10 trading partners of Turkey. So Turkey understands that, number one, we have to resolve the conflicts. We have to find a way to resolve them. Either mediation or through facilitation, we have to stop these conflicts. Because Turkey, and the beginning of the proactive foreign policy is here. Because Turkey understands that what happens in one conflict doesn't stay in that region. It exports insecurities in multiple different fora. Economic insecurity, human insecurity, political insecurity, all of those. So there was an active role that Turkey was playing to resolve the conflicts, and it became one of the most significant pillars. Resolve these conflicts, find mediation, and it doesn't need to be unilateral mediation. If possible, it is multilateral. Because another lesson learned is there's a political capital, there's a military capital, but there should be economic capital as well to resolve those conflicts. Sometimes resolving conflicts is not sufficient. You have to think about what next, the day after the resolving conflicts. How can you sustain that resolution? And that necessitates economic resources, regional initiatives as well. That is number one. And in each and every, including Syria, including any other conflict now, Turkey is trying to involve countries in the region, right? Number two, national security. So 2015, 2016 was a major learning curve for Turkey. Turkey has been dealing with terrorism for a long period of time, but the worst terrorist attack in Turkish history took place in these 2 years. The biggest airport in Turkey, biggest nightclub in Turkey, biggest squares in Turkey, biggest holiday resorts in Turkey were bombed by either PKK or ISIS. So Turkey's approach to terrorism was very clear against terrorism, but Turkey said, okay, we have to start an initiative, a military capacity, so that we will stop terrorism inside our borders and outside our borders. The third one is, as I mentioned at the beginning, economy. And here the connectivity and geoeconomics. From the very beginning, that was the point that is most coherent in Turkish foreign policy. Turkey argued that we need a regional integration and connectivity. Most of the problems in the region may be geopolitical problems, territorial problems, about the borders, etc. But there is one way to at least find a safety valve for these conflicts: it's economy, it's trade relations. And it started free trade agreements with countries, try to improve trade contacts, and the connectivity. I know it is the sexiest term right now, everybody is using, but it has been there. Just right now, we understand that connectivity between two countries is not sufficient. In order to make sure that connectivity is sustainable, all of the countries in the region, at least over that road, needs to be involved in this. Connectivities shouldn't be a geopolitical competition, but because that was what it used to be. And the fourth pillar is the idea that human security is really important. And in terms of human security, there are multiple different lessons that Turkey has been getting. Number one is the refugee flow. Until recently, Turkey, together with Venezuela, was the top two refugee receiver country in the world. And from Syria, from Yemen, from Libya, multiple different conflicts. So, in order to resolve the conflicts and provide safe, voluntary return of the refugees, because it is destabilizing not only societies, because countries like Turkey is economically, like at a certain level, and it can absorb certain number of refugees, but not unlimited. But it can also lead to political instabilities, just like what we see in Europe, far-right movements, etc. Right? And in addition to refugees, two things that may sound nothing to do with a panel on geopolitics, but disasters and climate change related incidents like wildfires. Turkey had its worst earthquake 2 years ago. And this was very close to the region, at the Syria border. And even it affects Syria, it created a lot of destruction in Aleppo as well. And Turkey said, okay, we understand that both the wildfires and natural disasters, we need some kind of regional architecture. At least we should be able to know that who has how many helicopters in order to extinguish fires in the forest. Because Turkey understands that these new wildfires, these new disasters, one country's efforts will not be sufficient. And to get international support will take time. The best option, and in disasters like earthquakes, you need the help that is closest to you. And a regional initiative to start a process, right? A very soft process, even in countries that may have different opinions, to have a forum just to alleviate natural disasters is very important. So these four pillars right now, and Turkey looking at the region, are the four things that Turkey will prioritize in its foreign policy, and it is actively working for those.
Yeah, thank you. That presents us with yet another frame. I mean, the frame of human security, focusing on refugees, focusing on climate, focusing on disaster relief. I think that's very important, maybe complementing what Mohammed also presented to us before in terms of connectivity, geoeconomics. But let me, to unpack this a bit further, let me take us back to the moment that Paul described for us. So Paul, a situation in flux. Clearly, I was struck by something that you said, that we've had, in this moment, very little diplomacy and a lot of coercion, right? So what we have is a series of attempts at coercive settlements, a coercive settlement vis-a-vis Iran, for example, on its nuclear program, complete dismantlement, coercive disarmament of Hezbollah, coercive displacement of Hamas in Gaza, and so on. Very little diplomacy. And that clearly sets us up for the possibility of another round of conflict. So in order to stave that off, in order to prevent another explosion or series of regional explosions, which may be less contained than the ones we've had before. So if there's another round with Iran, it may not be a 12-day war. It may be something bigger with spillovers, again, in the Gulf and the broader region and so on. If we have another round with Hezbollah, that also may have spillover effects, similarly with Gaza. What do we do to stave that off so that we can provide space for these alternative frames to emerge and consolidate, the geoeconomics, the human security. What do we need to do today?
Well, I think there's two elements to that. You might call it, one is a vertical element and one is a horizontal element, if we're talking geometry. On the vertical element, I would say, it should be obvious, but it needs to be said in the Middle East, that you can really not think of a stable regional order, a stable geometry, where then the physics and the energy can take advantage, and geoeconomics and crisis response, but it requires a certain structure. And in the vertical sense, the obvious point is you need a state-based system. And in much of the Middle East, we do not have that. Nor do we seem to be moving quickly towards establishing that. In the vertical sense, you have Lebanon, for example, struggling to create a state-based. You have Syria, a president trying to create a state there that is stable. Yemen is effectively stateless with no end in sight. Sudan, obviously the same. Egypt had its struggles with non-state actors, but seems to be, in a strong position. Libya is in another space. Some countries invest in anti-state or non-state actors. Iran's strategy is still, despite everything, based on maintaining non-state or anti-state forces in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Iraq, trying to get back into Syria. Israel is refusing to allow the emergence of a Palestinian state, which continues to create this vertical instability. So that's one very obvious direction to go. It translates into different interventions in different countries. How do you deal with Libya? How do you deal with Syria? How do you deal with Yemen? But we need to get to a state-based order. And any states that are investing in something different should obviously be urged not to do that. That's the vertical aspect. The other is the horizontal aspect. We are at a time of wars, right? There's multiple wars going on. One way you can look at war is that war is just, it's a tool. It's a continuation of politics by other means, as it's said, although that's not an accurate understanding of Clausewitz. But in many of the wars we are seeing, the war is in order to prevent politics. It's war to prevent negotiation. It's war to prevent stability. Obviously, the Hamas attacks of October 7 were designed to stop the Abraham Accords, this normalization in terms of relations with Israel. The support from Iran was in order to stop this political horizontal process that was taking place. Israel's excessive response and continuing policy is to keep the conflicts going in order not to have a political pathway with the Palestinians, in order not to talk about a two-state solution. And that contradiction between these usages of armed conflict in order to prevent exactly what you were saying, some kind of negotiated end, is a major problem in this region. What that means is that as Egypt is doing, as other countries, trying to turn these swords into plowshares, it's not as easy as it sounds, because many people with these swords don't want to turn them into plowshares, want something else. But I think for those countries that are committed to a de-escalation in the region, they have to deal with these dynamics of war. And I think we've identified many of the players who are in that camp. Egypt, certainly, the Gulf countries, Turkey. I think we need to look at the Israeli elections coming up sometime next year. I think it's pretty clear that the current government and leadership in Israel is really not interested in prioritizing ending wars, getting negotiated settlements with the Palestinians and with the region, and regards that as a risk to its effective basic policy of trying to get more of the West Bank and annexed and establishing a larger Jewish state. I think Iran is at also a tipping point. I think what it means for countries that have relations with Israel, with Iran, is to encourage a shift in strategy, both in Israel and in Iran, in directions that more plug in to this horizontal stabilization that we're trying to get at. I would say that President Trump himself is in a similar positive space. He does want negotiations, he wants deals, and the more that he can be encouraged to stay engaged, to put more of his political capital and security and economic sway, I think the better off we'll be. So that's the vertical and horizontal sides, but we have a long way to go.
So let me take this to a more specific level, because you mentioned in your interventions, I mean now and earlier, that there are actors trying to impose at least elements of order on what is a very still volatile situation or uncertain situation. You mentioned the Gulf, you mentioned Trump, which is interesting. I mean, we don't have US representation on this panel, but it would be interesting to know if President Trump thinks in terms of geography or thinks in terms of geometry or physics. And we have Egypt and Turkey. So let me start with then Mohammed. Mohammed, the role of the Gulf on these different flashpoints that can tip the region once again towards another round of confrontation. We have Iran, we have Lebanon, we have Gaza. What would be the role of the Gulf in trying to diffuse these flashpoints so that we can get to a situation where the physics can actually take hold, where this new energy can gain momentum and hopefully provide us with a different regional order moving forward?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say, for instance, the Iranian experts that I talk to regularly, our discussions today are different from our discussions 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we used to talk about non-state actors, we used to talk about hegemonic role, we used to talk about conflicts of identity, Shiaism, Sunnism. Today, we're talking about the potential of Iranian economy to the regional economy and global economy. This is a new discussion that we never had. Previously, we never had it because of sanctions, but even though sanctions snap back, people are still talking about it today. So that is a change of energy that we haven't seen. Frankly, the security interactions of Iran in the past was based on protecting the Shia. The engagement with Iran recently has been on protecting international law. It's a big change. We haven't seen this happening. So that energy is definitely changing in the region. So what does the GCC, the Gulf countries, would want to see? It would want to see and establish the fact that the point of engagement is economy. And you can see this very clearly in Syria. The type of engagement in Syria today on not only stabilization of Syria, but also making Syria part of the connectivity agenda. You see it in, for instance, the UAE investment in the port of Tartus. Port of Tartus can become part of IMEC because we've got 3 ports from this side. UAE, there is Jabal Ali, there is Khalifa port, and there's also Duqm port, who are all equipped to become part of IMEC because of their connectivity to the rail. On the other side, we used to have only Haifa, but now we could have Tartus, we could have Port of Beirut. So that is the type of ideas that people can see their stability, their security being connected, by being connected to the global. So I think stopping the wars. This is the one thing, for instance, we've talked about, or mentioned Sudan. This is the one thing the UAE has been talking about repeatedly. Stop the war. It's very easy. It's very intuitive. Stop the war, and then start a discussion on how could the future of Sudan be. Now, as long as the geopolitical concept of, which is based on a zero-sum calculus, either I win or I lose, the war will not stop. But if we want to change that energy, Sudan has always been seen as a major contributor to food security, which is now one of the major issues when it comes to a national security matrix.
Kilic, how can Turkey help to tip the balance from zero-sum outcomes to negotiated settlements? Again, looking at these different flashpoints, looking at Iran, looking at Lebanon, looking at Gaza, where Turkey does have a very important role, looking at Syria. We have multiple flashpoints now in Syria. We have a flashpoint vis-a-vis the Kurds, who still constitute a very important open question now as to how to integrate armed groups into the new Syrian military. We have the situation in the south with Israel's intervention on behalf of the Druze in Suwayda. So these many flashpoints, what can Turkey do to diffuse these flashpoints so that they don't tip the region to another round of conflict?
I think you mentioned Syria, and I think it's a good example that we have a challenge in front of us. It is a major victory, but from the very beginning, Turkey's approach to Syria was, starting from December last year, that there are multiple things. As he mentioned, the zero-sum game, Turkey tried to convince everybody that it is not Turkey's victory, number one, right? And in each and every conversation, they were trying to, the Turkish foreign policymakers were trying to convince everybody that this is the victory of the Syrian people. They got the, you know, like the biggest burden in this, and they won. And now, the second step after their victory is, what kind of Syria are we looking for? When you say that, oh, we want inclusive, stable, prosperous, democratic Syria with stable borders, etc., it is easy to say. But Syria poses a significant test for the future of the region. If the countries in the region can work in Syria, then they can work in each and every problem, because it will generate a path dependence. Because this challenge is, I traveled to Syria since last December multiple times, and you need a huge reconstruction in the country. And this necessitates resources. You need border security. Resources means from the Gulf and Saudi Arabia and other countries that can contribute. And of course, the engineering capacity of the countries like Egypt, like Turkey, and others. You need border security, so you need to have Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq needs to be involved in this process. You need a process of transformation in the politics of the country, so you need to make sure that none of the groups will be proxy of another country. And of course, you need the territorial integrity of Syria. Then you have to find a way to stop Israel to destabilize Syria. So, and of course, the Iranian dimension as well. All of the challenges that we have in the Middle East has something to do, has some part in Syria today. So it was the Turkey's position that regional problems necessitate regional solutions. But this was a slogan. And now the test is in Syria. If the countries in the region can launch an initiative and can convince the Western countries and other stakeholders to contribute in this process, then they would prove that this is a new Middle East. The new geometry is now, you know, in Big Bang Theory, there was this fictional game of three-dimensional chess game. So this is now a three-dimensional chess game. And you need to make sure that nobody is alienated, nobody is isolated, and everybody has an involvement in this process. Nobody should feel that one bloc win the war and now Syria can be used against the others. And if you can establish this trust, we have been talking about geometry, but we have to also understand that despite geoeconomics, despite connectivity, there is a deep trust issue. And we have to recognize that from the decades of regional rivalries. And if you can establish that trust in one way or another, and this necessitates, and this is important, a huge human resources. The diplomatic skills of the foreign ministries of the countries will not be sufficient. Disaster management authorities, development agencies, all of the organization necessitate that kind of diplomatic skill in order to be able to work together in a place like Syria, and maybe tomorrow in Yemen, and maybe the day after that in Lebanon and other places which was war-torn or
necessitate certain level of reconstruction. And I think Turkey can contribute at this point. Turkey can be a forum to resolve those, and Turkey, through 2 decades of experience, it doesn't sound too much, but when you look at the number of conflicts around Turkey, you can understand that it was an intensive learning curve. Learn that you need multiple stakeholders, regional multilateralism, and regional cooperation to resolve these conflicts.
So that's a very good segue to turn to Nasser. So you've heard these different frames emerging in our discussion. The frames of geoeconomics, connectivity, the focus on human security. I think you bring a very interesting perspective on this in your capacity as the Director General of the Union for the Mediterranean. The UFM is a flagship project that is designed to promote issues of connectivity, that is intended to deepen cooperation, regional cooperation on issues like climate, on issues such as refugees. Is it possible to actually move forward with these different frames while we still have regional conflicts that are very much unresolved and still open to open confrontation?
Good question, and very difficult one indeed. Well, let me join the previous speaker in saying that there is a new sense of pragmatism and focus on geoeconomics, and we can see many signs of that, and also pragmatism. When we see Turkey, Egypt, or Egypt, Turkey, Qatar rapprochement, which was a couple of years ago, not on the table completely. That points to a certain level of pragmatism. It's not only driven by their desire to play an important role in stabilizing the situation in Gaza, but it has an economic underpinning. Turkey and Egypt economic cooperation is growing exponentially, actually, in the last couple of years. And the same applies to so many others. You have spoken about Iran. The rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran is actually a development. So the region, also the hedging that many countries of the region has decided to hedge and not to rely solely on one superpower or one, and diversify their geopolitics and geoeconomics interest to different center of power in today's world, namely China, India, and Russia. Even strategic autonomy, when we see Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, when we see Egypt, China, growing military cooperation. All of that is pointing to a region that is willing and wanting. And for that, you do need a framework. And the Union for the Mediterranean, or the Arab League, or the GCC, all those regional organizations are designed to do exactly that, especially dealing with issue that is also transboundary, like you just mentioned, climate change. Let's not forget that we are the poorest region in the world when it comes to water resource. We are water poor as we speak today, and we will become even poorer in the next 10 to 20 years. And if we do not work collectively in terms of adaptation and mitigation, and if we do not work collectively in terms of renewable, that is very important, and if we do not work collectively when it comes to connectivity. Let me give you the example of IMEC, and let's be honest here, maybe it will not be to the liking of some. IMEC Northern Corridor, which is the one linking Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, was mainly not designed on geo-economic justification. It was merely an attempt to integrate Israel economically within the Abraham Accord into the region. Today we're talking about IMEC-E, meaning IMEC Egypt. We're talking about IMEC S, Syria, making IMEC and of course, why not Israel? But making IMEC general proposition based on real economic benefits, avoiding transshipment by using the Suez Canal, which is very expensive. The transshipment, I mean, route. So the drive is there, and our role as regional integration projects is to create a framework and a pathway and regional initiative that could translate the political will that I see happening into concrete projects and into complete initiative, all the way to creating a regional mechanism for civil defense dealing with national disaster. The examples are abound. I don't want to bore you with the details, but the sky is the limit as long as countries have the political will and have a deep understanding that working together is beneficial to every single component of our countries, region, and citizens.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. So you've all put a lot of food for thought for us to address, and hopefully we'll have time to come back for a final round of questions to maybe conclude this panel. But I would like to open it up to the floor for questions and answers. I have a few who have asked to take the floor. Oh, I see. Oh, forgive me. I'm still. I was hopeful looking at the clock in front of us that we have 15 minutes. So that's what the clock says. So per Dr. Ibtisam's instructions, we have time for one question, and that goes to Dr. El-Badr El-Shatiri. I don't see Dr. El-Shatiri.
Here.
He's over there.
Here.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Dr. Shatiri, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Haggag, for giving me the floor. I just have a very quick question on the issue of the attack on Qatar. And I find it quite puzzling that the U.S. will approve such attack. Actually, it's mind-boggling that the Trump administration will approve such attack. But yet, I see it as incredulous that Trump didn't know about it. So my question is, was that attack on Qatar a warning shot for different players in the region who are not forthcoming in negotiating with Israelis or normalizing with Israelis? So that's why we saw the Saudis hasten their strategic alliance with Pakistan. So was it, just to quote Dr. Paul, that this is a continuation of politics by other means?
Thank you very much. I don't know who would like to take this hot potato.
Dr. Paul was mentioned.
So Mohammed, maybe I could throw this in your lap if you would like to address this.
I can do it.
And then Nasser, I think you want to come in as well.
Paul was invoked into this, but I mean, anyhow, I think at least from my own readings, I think the jury is still out whether it was sanctioned, allowed by the US, or just happened at a moment of confusion or not. The important thing is the outcome. What is the outcome of all of that? The outcome is that can we have one singular umbrella? Can the Americans might protect Gulf countries, particularly in the case of Qatar, which is a major NATO ally and also houses a major base, could protect them from Israel, from America's enemies, but not from America's friends. That was the big question mark. But in my view, this is now driving a new strategic revision, and I think the strategic revision is going towards, I mean, we've already seen Gulf countries before that attack go into their own capacity building when it comes to production and I think we will see far more. I don't think Pakistan will be a substitute to the US, but again, it is part of the stakeholders centric approach to who have a benefit from this region to become immune to attacks.
If I can maybe go across the panel to address this question quickly and with concluding thoughts in under a minute, so we wrap up. Paul, let me turn to you.
Well, a comment on the Qatar thing. I mean, I think it created a big rupture between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Exactly who knew what, I don't know. I wasn't there. But I think that's what immediately led to Trump really taking the reins of the issue, forcing a Gaza deal. And in that sense, it had a positive effect on Trump getting involved and controlling Netanyahu and his actions. I think it also has a long-term effect on the Gulf countries, on Turkey and others, who really now are forced to take into account the potential threat from Israel to their countries down the road. I think that was new and was demonstrated in a new way. But as a concluding comment on what we were discussing before, the pragmatists are the ones that we've been discussing that have been trying to drive the politics, but it's the ideologues that have been dominating and creating the wars. Hamas obviously triggering this process, the Israeli right wing, which is a messianic ideological movement for whom politics is a distant thing. They have a particular ideological goal, not a pragmatic goal. The Islamic Republic of Iran really remains heavily ideological, not very pragmatic in the way one might say it should be pursuing Iranian national interests. So that division between the pragmatists and the ideologues is still a huge problem in the region and something we should be quite aware of.
Yeah. Nasser, please, concluding thoughts.
Well, I will, as usual, echo what has been said about the Israeli aggression against Qatar. It was a game changer, definitely, in terms of awakening the Gulf of Israel role as a disruptor, pushing the Gulf further towards more cooperation when it comes to creating a regional defense capability, even Egypt expressing its willingness to join such an architecture. It has led to the Egyptian president for the first time since his election calling Israel an enemy during the Doha summit. This was not gone unnoticed by so many actors, pushed Trump, as you rightly said so, into a more proactive and, as I said in my earlier intervention, driven the whole region, including Turkey, Egypt, many, towards the idea of strategic autonomy, not relying on a superpower, but building alliances, cooperation at the region level, but also with other center of power at the international stage to ensure a degree of independence and strategic autonomy vis-à-vis Israel, but vis-à-vis also the US, I might say.
Yeah. Kilic, you have the final word on this panel. Bring us to a close.
Just to see, after this administration, when Steve Witkoff and Tom Barak write their memoirs, it will be interesting. We will learn interesting stuff about what was happening in the region, things that we don't know. And the attack in Qatar and other things raise another important thing that we have to take into consideration, the need for a security architecture in the region. It doesn't need to be a military alliance. It doesn't need to be a bloc or alignment. It needs to be a forum to provide that security, because the war between Israel and Iran and the attack in Qatar can generate an arms race in the region. And we have seen in the defense expenditures of those countries that in the Middle East it is skyrocketing. The self-reliance and strategic autonomy and the national defense industries are important, but it doesn't lead to a wrong signaling and potential dominance of military industrial architectures in those countries to lead the foreign policies.
It might, actually.
Yeah. Which may lead to another form of disaster in the region. Because of that, we may need a security architecture that is soft, but that's meaningful, that will build trust among the countries.
I apologize to those of you who I could not get to for questions. I think we were deceived by the clock. I think we started our panel late. But please join me in thanking our panelists for what I thought was a very insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Karim.